Hello, and in today's 5-Minute Friday we're going to discuss a subject that's come up a number of times, which is how to take one continuous video that covers multiple components. And to use this as an example, I've got a simple plan here. It's got an orbit and a waypoint, and both of them have the automatic capture turned on currently. And what happens if I run a simulation, you're going to see a few different things. The first thing is we've got two video files, one here covering the orbit and one here covering the waypoints, and we've got this big gap in the middle. So there's a few things that we need to do. The first thing is we need to reduce this gap to the smallest that it can be, and then the second thing is we need to make sure that the transition between these two elements is as smooth as possible. So if we look at why we have this gap here, there's a number of different things that we need to take into account. The first is the orbit is at 200 feet and the waypoints start at 150 feet. So immediately there's a drop between the end of the orbit and the beginning of the waypoints. And the waypoints also don't start at the same point that the orbit ends. So we need to bring these things closer together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my waypoint, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to drag this waypoint right over so that it lands basically on top of where the orbit ends. Okay, so now we've got this on top of where the orbit ends. So the orbit ends and the waypoint start, but there's still an altitude difference. But on the assumption that I want my path to be 150 feet high, I need to bring the start of the path up to the altitude of the orbit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on waypoints, and I'm going to go to my waypoints alpha, and I'm going to change waypoint alpha to be 200 feet. And then I'm going to go to waypoint bravo, and I'm going to bring that back down to the 150 feet that it was at. So now what's going to happen is the orbit's going to finish at 200 feet, and then it's going to transition over time from 200 feet down to 150 feet, and then the path can realistically start. So now let's run our simulation and see what happens. And you can see immediately the gap has reduced significantly. It's no longer this big gap that we had before, but there is still a big gap here. So what else are we missing? One of the things that a lot of people are not aware of is you have this start component that each of the elements has. And if I go into the waypoints and I click start, you'll see there's this important one here called arrival, and it's set to 4 seconds, and that basically allows us 4 seconds between the end of one element and the beginning of the next. And I'm going to change that to 0. So now what should happen is it should transition almost immediately from one to the other. So let's run our simulation again, and now you can see we've got the gap down to almost nothing. But there's an important thing here, which is I want to run the simulation. I'm going to start the simulation around where the transition is going to end, and watch this gimbal angle. So as I run this, the orbit comes around, it goes 44 degrees, and then it jumps to 37 degrees. Well, that's because the path, the start of the path is going to be facing 37 degrees, and the end of the orbit was facing 44 degrees. So how can we fix that? Well, we're going to go and we're going to change the drone heading just on waypoint alpha. So if I go into waypoint alpha, I click on that, and I'm going to say drone heading, and I think it was 44 degrees. 44 degrees north. Okay, and now let's run our simulation, and we'll jump over to the orbit again, and now what we should see is that the transition is now much smoother, and it goes 44 degrees. And the only issue that we have now is that the heading is always going to be 44 degrees north. That's not exactly what I want because it's slightly off kilter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into waypoint bravo, and I'm going to change the drone heading on waypoint bravo to be 0 degrees, but not north, path, so that it's going to face directly along the path. So what's going to happen is the transition from alpha to bravo will enable the drone to straighten out and then fly straight. Let's just run that simulation one more time. I'll jump over towards the end here and hit play, and you should find that the transition now is actually reasonably smooth. So now we're into the path, and almost no transition there whatsoever. So we've managed to smooth out the transition between the 2 points so that when the video is continuous, it won't be too obvious that you've moved. There'll always be some kind of a gap because as the orbit finishes, it will slow down and then it will speed up again once the path starts. But we've got this gap realistically as small as it can be. So then the final thing that we need to do is to stop capturing 2 video files and capture just 1 video file. The easiest way to do that is I'm going to come out of my simulation. I'm going to go into each of these components and I'm going to turn off the automatic video capture just by deleting it. And go back down here, automatic capture, delete. So now we're not capturing any video. And now we're going to embed these 2 elements into a list. The way I'm going to do that, I'm going to click on the first one, click on the second one by holding the Shift key so that they're both highlighted. So click and then Shift click. And then you come up here and you select these 3 dots and you say embed in list. And now what you've got is these items are embedded in a list. But now that you have them in a list, you have this nice little option here that says add automatic capture. If you click on that and select video and now run your simulation, what you're going to find is you now have 1 continuous video starting at the beginning of the orbit, ending at the end of the path, and the transition here should be pretty smooth. So let's watch, and we are now into the path and almost no transition. So that's it. That's the entire thing. It will of course depend on exactly which elements you're adding together, but these are the techniques that you can use to smooth out the transition between the 2. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Please subscribe. It helps me get out to other people on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.